Margaret Caldwell fixed the broken shutter on the widow Hester's house with her own hands in the summer heat while the town's anniversary celebration rang out 2 streets over. She could hear them laughing. She could hear the music. She could hear Chairman Howell's voice carrying on the wind, reading the names of people who had built Rosewood, he said. People who mattered. Her hands were bleeding from the wood. Her name was not on that list. It had never been on any list. And the worst part? The part that sat in her chest like a stone she had carried so long, she had forgotten it was heavy, was that not a single person in that celebrating crowd had noticed she was missing. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Rosewood, Virginia, summer 1817. Margaret Caldwell had a particular way of entering a room. She came in, quietly found what needed doing, did it, and left before anyone had fully registered she had been there. She had developed this quality over so many years that it had stopped being a strategy and become simply who she was. A woman shaped by invisibility, the way water is shaped by the banks that contain it. Entirely formed by what surrounded her with no particular say in the shape. She was 31 years old. She was not unhappy exactly. Unhappy implied an expectation of something different, and Maggie had stopped expecting things some years ago. She was simply present. Moving through Rosewood, Virginia, like weather. Noted when inconvenient and otherwise unremarked upon. The morning of the anniversary celebration, she woke early because she always woke early. Dressed quickly because she had learned that dressing with care only made the forgetting more pointed, and went first to the widow Hester's house on the north end of town. Because Hester had mentioned 3 days ago that the shutter on the east window was coming loose and it was keeping her up at night. 3 days. Maggie had been turning it over for 3 days, calculating when she could get to it, what tools she'd need, whether the wood needed replacing or just rehanging. Hester herself had not brought it up again. She had probably forgotten she'd mentioned it. That was fine. Maggie had not forgotten. She fixed the shutter in the morning heat, while the town 2 streets over began setting up chairs and hanging bunting for the celebration. She could hear the music starting fiddle and drum, the sound of Rosewood congratulating itself on another year. She could hear voices she recognized, laughter that carried. She did not feel sorry for herself. She genuinely did not. She had made her peace with the particular geography of her place in Rosewood a long time ago. People were not cruel to her. They were not anything to her. She existed in the particular category of person who is useful. The way a reliable road is useful. No one celebrates a road, no one is unkind to it. It is simply there and taken for granted, and occasionally complained about when it develops a rut. She was finishing up with the shutter when Hester came out onto the porch. "Margaret." Hester squinted at her. "What are you doing up there?" "Your shutter," Maggie said. "You mentioned it." "I mentioned it days ago." "I know. I couldn't get to it until today." Hester made a sound that was somewhere between gratitude and reproach. "You didn't have to climb up there yourself. You could have asked someone. It's done now," Maggie said. She came down from the ladder, tested the shutter once. It held. "You shouldn't hear any noise tonight." She picked up her toolbox. "The celebration is on," Hester said. "Why aren't you going?" Maggie looked at the older woman. "I'll pass by later," she said. "I've got Mrs. Abernethy's boy to check on first. He had a fever 3 days ago, and I want to make sure he's through it." Hester watched her go with the expression of a woman who wanted to say something and was not quite sure what it was. Pierre, Tommy Abernethy, was through the fever. His mother, a thin woman named Sarah, who had been a widow for 4 years and was managing 3 children on the income of taking in laundry, met Maggie at the door with the particular look of a person who is grateful and ashamed of needing to be grateful at the same time. "He slept through the night," Sarah said. "Good." Maggie put her hand on Tommy's forehead, cool, normal. She looked at him. "Does your throat still hurt?" Tommy, who was 9 and had the practical courage of a boy who has been sick enough to stop being embarrassed about it, said, "Not as much. Can I have water?" You can have all the water you want." Maggie looked at Sarah. "Keep him inside today, out of the heat. And the herbs I left another 2 days of the tea even though he's better. Don't stop when he feels well. Stop when I say." Sarah nodded. She was holding the doorframe with one hand, and Maggie noticed, she always noticed these things, that her knuckles were raw. Laundry work, all summer. "Have you eaten today?" Maggie asked. "I'm fine," Sarah said. "That's not what I asked." Sarah's jaw worked. "I'll bring something over this evening," Maggie said. "Don't argue with me about it." "Margaret, I can't keep accepting—" "You're not accepting anything," Maggie said. "I have more bread than I need, and Tommy needs to eat properly while he recovers, and that's the end of it." She picked up her bag. "I'll come back this evening." She left before Sarah could find the words to object. She passed the town square at noon. The celebration was in full-form tables with food, the Rosewood Ladies' Society selling preserves, children running between adult legs, the particular festive energy of a small town that has given itself permission to stop working for an afternoon. She stopped at the edge of it. She knew almost everyone there. Mrs. Burton, who had come to Maggie's door 2 winters ago, when her husband had what turned out to be an inflammation of the lungs, whom Maggie had helped nurse through the worst of it over 6 weeks. The Aldrich brothers, whose father's farm Maggie had helped manage briefly when old Mr. Aldrich broke his arm in 1815 and couldn't handle the accounts. Young Penny Morrison, who had sat in Maggie's front room every Tuesday afternoon for 2 years learning to read. None of them looked up when she passed. Not because they were unkind, just because she was Maggie. She was always there. You didn't particularly look up when something was always there. She was almost past the square when she heard it. Chairman Howell was on the platform, reading from a paper in his best civic voice, listing the names of Rosewood citizens who had contributed to the town's 30-year anniversary compilation, people whose service and generosity had built Rosewood into what it was. She paused. She did not mean to pause. She was simply briefly, stupidly held there by something she had not entirely killed in herself yet. Some small, persistent ember of hoping. Howell read 12 names. She counted. 12 names, all of them people. She knew all of them people whose contributions were real and genuine and worth acknowledging. Her name was not among them. She had fixed 17 roofs in Rosewood in the past decade. She had nursed 14 people through serious illness. She had taught 9 children to read. She had, in the winter of 1814, quietly given the last of her father's small inheritance $60, which was everything she had put aside to ensure that 4 families on the south end of town did not lose their homes to the cold-weather creditor who had been pressing them. None of the people who owed their houses to that $60 knew where it had come from. She had made sure of that. She turned away from the square. She walked the rest of the way home with the particular straight-backed posture of a woman who has decided once again that she is fine. She was almost fine. She was mostly fine. She went inside and she set down her bag and she stood in her kitchen and she pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed. Once, twice, 3 times. Then she started on the bread for Tommy Abernethy. She did not see the carriage. She had been inside when it arrived sometime around 3 in the afternoon, based on later accounts from people who noticed things like carriages, but not like Margaret Caldwell. A black carriage, well-maintained, drawn by 2 horses. A man who got down from it with the careful attention of someone who is observing a place rather than performing an arrival. She did not see any of it. She found out about the carriage the way she found out about most things in Rosewood through the town's informal information network, which was to say, through Mrs. Burton, who mentioned it when she encountered Maggie on the street the following morning. "There's a gentleman in town," Mrs. Burton said, with the particular tone of a woman delivering news she considers significant. "Is there?" Maggie said. She was carrying bread to Mrs. Abernethy's, and she did not slow her pace. Staying at the Rosen Inn, very well dressed, asking questions about the town. "What kind of questions?" Mrs. Burton paused. "That's the strange part," she said. "He wasn't asking about the prominent families, or the church, or who has land? She paused again, as if the strangeness of this still had not fully settled. He asked Thomas at the inn who kept the town's poor families from going under during the winter of 1814. Maggie stopped walking, just for a moment. Then she kept going. Probably a newspaper man, she said, or someone looking for charitable organizations to write about. Thomas said he didn't seem like a newspaper man. Mrs. Burton kept pace with her. He seemed like a man who already knew the answer and was checking whether the town did. Maggie said nothing. She delivered the bread to Sarah Abernethy, checked on Tommy, and went home. She told herself she was not thinking about the carriage. She was thinking about the carriage. She encountered him the next day at Pearson's Dry Goods. She was at the counter asking about thread she had promised to mend old Mr. Carver's winter coat, and the color he needed was a specific dark brown that Pearson didn't always stock when the bell above the door sounded, and a man came in. She heard him, but she did not turn immediately because she was in the middle of a transaction, and turning from a transaction to look at a stranger was not the kind of thing Maggie did. She was focused on the thread. "Excuse me," the man said. Pearson looked past Maggie. "Yes, sir. I'm looking for someone who might tell me about the local roads. I understand the track past the old Harrington Mill sometimes floods this time of year, and I want to know whether to go around." "Ask Donnelly at the stable," Pearson said. "He knows the roads better than anyone." "Much obliged." A pause. "Though I'll say the road I came in on yesterday was in remarkable condition for a county route. Someone's been tending it." Maggie, who had been tending that road, filling the ruts that formed every spring, redirecting the runoff that turned the north bend into mud, kept her eyes on the thread samples. "Couldn't tell you who does that," Pearson said. "It just gets done." "Things that just get done," the man said pleasantly, "usually have someone doing them. They don't tend to do themselves." Pearson looked faintly bemused by the observation. Maggie picked up the dark brown thread. "This one," she said to Pearson. "2 spools, please." "Miss Caldwell." Pearson turned to get them. She heard behind her the brief particular quality of someone paying closer attention. She turned. The man was perhaps 45, lean, well-dressed in the manner of someone whose clothes were good quality rather than showy. His face was the kind that did not announce itself dramatically, but improved considerably the longer you looked at it. Intelligent eyes, a careful attention to whatever they rested on. They were resting on her, not the way men typically looked at Maggie, which was to say, not without acknowledgement of her existence, but without particular notice of it. This was different. This was the look of a man who had been looking for something and was wondering if he had just found it. She found it slightly unnerving. "Miss Caldwell," he said. It was not a question. "My name is William Harrington." She knew that name. Most people in Virginia knew that name. "Mr. Harrington," she said evenly. "I've been asking around town," he said, "about someone." "So I heard." She picked up her thread from the counter. "Rosewood is a small place. News travels." "What news reached you?" She looked at him directly. "That you were asking about the winter of 1814. About who helped the South End families." He watched her face with the attentiveness of a man reading something important. "And do you know who that was?" "I have an idea," she said. "So do I," he said quietly. They looked at each other across Pearson's dry goods counter with the particular charged quality of a conversation that both people understand is about more than its surface. Maggie picked up her parcel. "Good day, Mr. Harrington," she said. She walked out. She was not shaken. She told herself she was not shaken. She was slightly shaken. Not from any romantic notion. She was 31 years old, and she had dispensed with romantic notions some years back in the practical way of a woman who had more immediate things to address. She was shaken by something else. By the specific sensation of being looked at. Not assessed for usefulness. Not tolerated. Not forgotten before the conversation finished. Actually looked at. She found it disorienting in the way that a sudden sound disorients you. When you have been in silence so long, you forgot silence wasn't the natural state. She delivered Mr. Carver's thread and went home, and thought about it more than she intended to. He found her the next morning. She was at the schoolhouse, a room in the back of the church that Reverend Mills let her use on Tuesday and Thursday mornings for the children whose families could not afford the subscription school on the main street. There were 6 of them that morning. Penny Morrison, who was 15 now and past what Maggie could teach her, but who came anyway and helped with the younger ones. Tommy Abernethy recovered, and restless and significantly more focused on a piece of string he had found under his chair than on the letter chart on the wall. 4 others ranging from 7 to 12 in varying states of engagement. Maggie was working with the youngest, a girl named Ada, who had only been coming for 2 months and was still uncertain about letters, still had the particular anxiety of a child who has been told she is slow and has started to believe it. "Try again," Maggie said. Not impatiently, just steadily. Ada looked at the letter. "B," she said. "Are you sure?" Ada looked harder. "D," she said. "Yes." Maggie moved the card. "They look alike. That's not your fault, that's just how they are. You just have to look longer at the curve. Which side does it fall on?" Ada stared. Her small face moved through concentration into something that was almost pleasure. "That side. D. It falls that way." "Every time," Maggie said. "D falls that way. When you see it, it'll remind you." Ada beamed. It was the kind of smile that a child gives when something that was confusing becomes clear, and it was, Maggie had always thought, one of the finest things she had ever seen. Worth all of it. Worth every early morning and late evening and forgotten celebration and unpaid account at the bakery. She became aware at the edge of her attention that someone was standing in the doorway. She did not look up immediately. "D," she said to Ada. "Say it again." "D," Ada said firmly. "Good." Maggie looked up. William Harrington was standing in the doorway of the church back room, hat in his hands, watching her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. 6 children turned to look at him. Penny Morrison looked at him, looked at Maggie, and looked back at him with the sharp assessment of a 15-year-old who misses very little. "Mr. Harrington," Maggie said, "this is a lesson." "I can see that," he said. "I apologize for interrupting. I'll wait." "You'll wait outside," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He went outside. Penny Morrison watched the door close and then looked at Maggie with an expression that contained approximately 400 unasked questions. "Letter chart," Maggie said. "Penny, take them through the 2nd row." Penny took them through the 2nd row. He was sitting on the step outside the church when the lesson ended 30 minutes later with the easy patience of a man who had decided to wait and was not going to be impatient about it. The children filed out around him. Most of them stared. He greeted each of them with the same courteous nod, as though small children deserved the same acknowledgement as adults, which was not the universal position in Maggie's experience. Penny was the last one out. She looked at him, looked at Maggie, said with great dignity, "Good morning, Miss Caldwell." "Good morning, sir." "Good morning," William said. Penny walked away, and then from about 20 feet turned and looked at Maggie once more with the expression of a girl who fully intended to discuss this later. Maggie looked at William. "You waited," she said. "I said I would." "Most people say they'll wait and then don't. Most people," he said, "have somewhere else they'd rather be." She looked at him for a moment. "Walk with me," she said. "I have calls to make." He stood, put on his hat with the particular precise motion of a man who wore hats correctly, fell into step beside her. "You're not going to ask why I'm here," he said. "You'll tell me or you won't," she said. "I'm not in the habit of pressing people." "Are you in the habit of trusting them?" She considered that honestly. "Not particularly," she said. "I've found it's a habit that requires the other person to hold up their end, and that's not reliable." "Fair assessment," he said. They walked in silence for half a block. I'll tell you why I'm here. Not because you pressed, but because you deserve a straight answer." He paused. "I came to Rosewood on business. There's property I'm considering for a family matter. Nothing significant. But I've been here 3 days now, and I keep finding the same thing. Everywhere I go, there's evidence of someone. Someone fixed this. Someone arranged that. Someone made sure this family had enough. And no one says a name." He glanced at her. "Except to say it's probably Maggie. Said the way you say it about something you don't think much about." Maggie walked. "And," she said. "And I found that interesting," he said. "More than interesting. I found it bothered me, Miss Caldwell. In the way that injustice bothers a person when they see it clearly." She stopped walking. She turned and looked at him. "I don't need anyone to be bothered on my behalf," she said. Her voice was careful, not defensive, precise. "I do what I do because it needs doing, not because I'm waiting for someone to notice and object." "I know that," he said. "That's what makes it worse." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're a Harrington," she said. "From the estate in—" "Yes." "You don't have business in Rosewood. There's no Harrington property anywhere near here." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No, there isn't." She held his gaze. "Then why are you here?" she said. He looked at her with the directness of a man who has decided to stop managing the distance between what he knows and what he says. "Because 2 years ago," he said, "I passed through Rosewood in winter, on my way to Richmond, and my carriage threw a wheel on the North Road, the one someone has been maintaining, and I would have been stranded in a bad way if the road had been in the condition it was the year before." He paused. "I asked at the inn who kept the North Road. The innkeeper looked at me like I'd asked who kept the stars in the sky. He said it just gets done. Attributed it to no one." A pause. "I made some inquiries before I left. I learned it was a woman named Margaret Caldwell, and I found I couldn't stop thinking about that, about a person who does something real and necessary and receives nothing for it, not even acknowledgement." He looked at her steadily. "So I came back." The summer street was busy around them. Someone called out a greeting to Maggie automatically, habitually, without quite looking at her, and she returned it the same way. She and William stood still in the middle of it, and she looked at this man who had come back to a town he had no business in because of a road she had filled ruts in quietly for 10 years. And she felt something she could not name, something that was not quite trust and not quite hope, but was in the same family as both. "Mr. Harrington," she said. "William," he said. She looked at him. "People usually notice me when they need something from me," she said. It came out more plainly than she intended, more honest. He did not flinch from it. "I know," he said. "I know that's true, and I know there's no reason yet for you to believe I'm different." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm asking for a chance to show it." She looked at him for a long moment. Around them, Rosewood went about its business. 12 years of being useful and invisible and unremarked, and this man had come back to a town he had no reason to return to because he could not stop thinking about an unnamed person who had filled ruts in a road. She was not foolish enough to call that nothing. She was not ready yet to call it something. "I have calls to make," she said. "Mrs. Abernethy on Sycamore Street, then old Mr. Carver on the North End." She looked at him. "If you'd like to walk, you're welcome to walk." Something moved through his face, not triumph, not the satisfaction of a man who has gotten what he came for. Something quieter than that, more like relief. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. They walked. He walked with her for 3 hours that morning. He did not talk over her. He did not try to help in ways that made her work more difficult. When she went into Sarah Abernethy's house to check on Tommy, he waited on the front step without being asked, and when she came out he said, "Is the boy well?" with the tone of a man asking a genuine question rather than a polite one. "Better," she said. "He'll be fully recovered by the week's end." "Good," he said. At Mr. Carver's house, she repaired the coat while Mr. Carver talked. He always talked during the mending. It was their established arrangement, and William sat in the third chair in the old man's kitchen and listened with the quality of attention that most people did not give to a 72-year-old man's memories of the town 20 years prior. Mr. Carver noticed. He stopped mid-sentence and looked at William with the sharp eyes of an old man who has seen enough of the world to know when something is different. "You're listening," Carver said. "You're saying interesting things," William said. Carver turned to Maggie. "Where'd you find this one?" "He found himself," Maggie said without looking up from the coat. Carver looked at William again, then at Maggie, then back. He smiled the small, private smile of an old man who has figured something out and is keeping it to himself. "More coffee," he said to William. "Please," William said. She did not ask him to come back. He came back anyway, the next morning, and the one after, and the one after that. Always with some stated purpose, a question about the road, a book he had found that he thought might be useful for the Tuesday lessons, a piece of information about a property matter that turned out to require less time to discuss than the walk had taken. And Maggie accepted each stated purpose with the polite disbelief of a woman who understood perfectly well that the purposes were incidental. She did not send him away. She told herself it was because he was genuinely useful. On the morning calls he carried things without being asked. He spoke to people with the same respect, regardless of their circumstances, and once with old Carver, he had noticed a loose step on the porch and fixed it while Maggie was inside without mentioning it afterward. Without mentioning it. That was the thing she kept returning to. He had fixed the step and not said so. She found that more significant than anything he had actually said. On the fourth morning walking back from the Abernethy house, he said, "May I ask you something?" "You may ask," she said. "I'll decide whether to answer." The winter of 1814. The families on the South End who kept their houses. He was looking straight ahead. "Was that you?" Maggie walked. "Where did you hear about that?" she said. "Different people, different pieces. None of them seemed to know the whole of it." He paused. "I put the pieces together." She walked for another half block. "The creditor was pressing them in January," she said finally. February at the latest he would have gone to the sheriff. 4 families, children in 3 of them. She paused. "I had $60 from my father's estate. It was earmarked for nothing specific." "It was earmarked for your future," he said quietly. "They needed it more immediately than I did." He was quiet for a moment. "Did you tell anyone?" "No." "Why not?" She looked at him. "Because if I'd told them they'd have felt obligated," she said. "And obligation isn't kindness, it's a transaction. I didn't do it to create a transaction." He stopped walking. She stopped too because he had, and looked back at him. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen directed at her before in 31 years of living. It was the expression of a man who has just understood something important. "Miss Caldwell," he said. "Margaret." He said her name the way people say a name when they mean the actual person, not the social function. "I came to Rosewood because I could not stop thinking about a woman who maintained a road without recognition. And in 4 days, I have found that the road was the smallest thing she'd done." He looked at her steadily. How does a town look at something like that and not see it? Maggie looked at him. She thought about the celebration, about 12 names on a list, about Sarah Abernethy's raw knuckles and Tommy's fever and Ada's face when D fell into place. She thought about 31 years of being useful and unremarked and mostly fine with it. "They see me," she said carefully. "They just don't notice. There's a difference. Seeing as I exist in their peripheral vision. I'm part of the town the way the church bell is part of the town. You hear it so often you stop hearing it." "That's not all right," he said. "No," she said quietly. "It isn't." She paused. "But I stopped waiting for it to be different some time ago." He looked at her for a long moment. "What if someone asked you to start waiting again?" he said. She held his gaze. "That would depend," she said, "on whether the someone was reliable." "I intend to be," he said. She looked at him, This man who had come back to a town he had no business in, who fixed steps without mentioning it, who listened to old men and asked after sick children, and had stood in Pearson's dry goods, saying that things that just get done usually have someone doing them. She looked at him, and she felt the particular careful, almost frightening feeling of something she had buried beginning to move. "I know you do," she said. She meant, "I haven't decided yet whether that's enough." He heard it, and he nodded the nod of a man who understood he was being told to prove it and was not going to argue with the requirement. They walked on. Around them, Rosewood went about its day entirely unaware that something had shifted. As usual, the most important thing happening in the town was the thing nobody noticed. William Harrington stayed in Rosewood. That was the thing people kept remarking on, not with warmth exactly, but with the particular curiosity of a small town that cannot quite categorize something it is observing. A man of his standing in a town of Rosewood's modest size did not stay. Men of his standing passed through. They conducted their business, and they left, and the town returned to its regular rhythms, and within a week, the visit was just another piece of local conversation. William did not leave. By the end of the first week, the Rosen Inn had upgraded his room without being asked, because Thomas Rosen was a practical man who understood that a guest who showed no signs of departing deserved more than the standard arrangements. By the end of the second week, the town had begun the particular social process of deciding what to make of him. The prevailing theory among the women of the Rosewood Ladies' Society was that he was looking for property. The prevailing theory among the men who gathered at Donnelly's stable was that he was looking for a wife. Both groups were watching Maggie. Neither group quite said what they were watching her for. Maggie was aware of being watched. She was not accustomed to being watched, which made the awareness more acute. She went about her usual rounds, the Tuesday and Thursday lessons, the morning calls, the road, the dozens of small necessary things that filled her days, and she felt at the edge of everything the new and strange sensation of people registering her presence. It was not entirely comfortable. She told herself that was because she was unaccustomed to it. She told herself that on Tuesday morning, when Penny Morrison arrived at the church schoolroom 15 minutes early and spent those 15 minutes asking questions that were ostensibly about the lesson plan and were actually about William Harrington. "He came to the lesson again yesterday," Penny said. "He walked past," Maggie said. "That's different." He stopped and looked in the window for quite a while. "Penny." "I'm just saying what I observed." "Observe the letter chart," Maggie said. Penny observed the letter chart with the expression of a girl performing compliance while thinking about something else entirely. "He fixed Mr. Carver's porch step," she said. Maggie looked up. "Without telling anyone," Penny continued with the emphasis of someone presenting evidence. "Mr. Carver didn't even know until he went out the next morning. He told my mother." A pause. "My mother said that was remarkable. Your mother is generous in her assessments." "My mother said—" Penny stopped, apparently deciding whether to continue. She continued. "My mother said she had never seen a man of that kind pay attention to what actually mattered in a place. She said usually they pay attention to what's expensive." Maggie said nothing. She thought about the step, about the fact that he had not mentioned it. "Letter chart," she said. He found her on Wednesday at the North Road. She was there in the early morning, the way she always was after the summer rains, checking the east bend where runoff collected, redirecting it before it cut further into the road surface. She had a shovel and a particular understanding of where the water wanted to go if left to itself, and the work of the road was mostly the work of redirecting things that had gotten off course. She heard him coming. He made no particular effort to be quiet, which she appreciated, and she kept working. He stopped at the edge of the road and watched for a moment. "Is there anything I can do?" he said. "Can you manage a shovel?" "I can manage a shovel." She handed him one. She showed him where to dig and where to direct the material, and he followed her instructions without asking unnecessary questions or attempting to improve on her method, which was more than she could say for the one time she had tried to involve Tommy Abernethy's older brother in this particular task. They worked for 40 minutes in the early morning heat. When the bend was clear and the runoff was redirected properly, he stood up and looked at the work with the expression of a man who has done something concrete and found it satisfying. "You do this alone every time," he said. "Yes." "How often?" "After every significant rain. 3 times in summer, sometimes 4. He was quiet for a moment. "Maggie." He used her name, the short version, the one everyone in town used, but in his voice, it sounded different from how the town used it. The town said Maggie the way you say a thing's name. He said it the way you say a person's name. "How long have you been doing this?" "The road since 1809. He did the calculation. 8 years. 8 years? And in 8 years, no one has asked why the North Road is better than the county roads in the next 2 towns, she said. They just use it. She picked up her shovel. That's how it works. Things that get done quietly stay quiet. He looked at her. Does that bother you? She considered the question honestly. With him, she had found dishonest answers did not quite hold their shape. He asked questions with enough sincerity that evasion felt wrong in a way it didn't usually. Sometimes, she said, less than it used to. She paused. More on some days than others. He nodded. He accepted that answer the way he accepted most things, without pushing past it, without trying to resolve it into something neater than it was. Can I ask you something? He said. You already asked me something. The corner of his mouth moved. Can I ask you another something? Go ahead. Why do you do it? The road. Mrs. Abernethy, the children, the families in 1814. He held her gaze. You're not wealthy. You're not it costs you. Costs you time, costs you money, costs you the little you have put aside for yourself. Why? Maggie looked at the road. She thought about how to answer that honestly. When I was 14, she said, my father was ill for a winter, a bad winter. We didn't have much, and what we had was going fast, and I thought... She paused. I thought this is how people disappear. Not all at once. A little at a time, a need that doesn't get met here, a connection that slips there, until one day the town looks around and you're simply gone. And no one is quite sure when it happened. She looked at him. I didn't want that to happen to anyone else, she said. And I had hands. And I had time. A pause. So I used them. He was very quiet. And who, he said, used theirs for you? The question landed in a place she did not expect. She did not answer immediately. She picked up the shovel and started back toward town because some questions needed walking time before they could be answered properly. He walked beside her. After a while, she said, No one particularly, and I made my peace with that. Have you? He said, not as a challenge, genuinely asking. She thought about it. Mostly, she said. What does mostly feel like? She looked at him sideways. Like a road you've been maintaining for 8 years, she said. Solid most of the time. Still gets ruts after a hard rain. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said very quietly, I'd like to help with the ruts, Maggie, if you'd let me. She did not respond, but she did not pull away either, and he did not push further, and they walked the rest of the way back to town in the particular silence of 2 people who have said something real and are giving it room to settle. The social machinery of Rosewood had opinions about all of this. Mrs. Burton had the most opinions and the most organized system for distributing them. She had been watching Maggie and William with the focused intensity of a woman who considered herself the town's chief interpreter of interpersonal developments, and by the end of the 2nd week, she had assembled a comprehensive theory that she was sharing selectively, which in Rosewood meant she had shared it with everyone. The theory was, this William Harrington was interested in Maggie. Romantically. Which was either charming or suspicious, depending on who was evaluating it. The charming interpretation, a man of standing seeing genuine worth, where the town had been negligent in recognizing it. The suspicious interpretation, a man of standing who had resources and position and options far beyond what Rosewood could offer, had singled out a woman with no family money and no social prominence, and the question was, why? Mrs. Burton had framed these interpretations to Mrs. Aldrich on a Tuesday morning, and Mrs. Aldrich had taken the suspicious interpretation to heart and expanded it considerably by the time she encountered Mrs. Howell at the dry goods on Wednesday. And by Thursday, the version circulating through Rosewood's Ladies' Society was that William Harrington was a man of dubious intent, whose interest in Margaret Caldwell warranted watching. Maggie heard all of this through the usual channels. She heard it, and she filed it, and she continued her rounds without particular comment, because the social machinery of Rosewood had been generating theories about her for 31 years, and none of those theories had been either accurate or actionable. But she thought about it. Quietly, honestly, the way she thought about things, she did not want to dismiss, but could not yet evaluate. She thought, what does he actually want? She had asked him directly on the road. He had said he wanted a chance to show he was different from people who only noticed her when they needed something. That was an answer. It was a genuine answer. But it was also the kind of answer that was impossible to disprove in the short term. She had spent 31 years being useful to people who wanted things from her. She was very good at identifying that pattern. She was less certain when it came to William whether the pattern applied, and uncertainty, she had learned, was worth respecting. The moment that changed things came on a Thursday. She was at the bakery, the same bakery where the owner had reminded her of her unpaid account, as he did every time she came in, with the consistency of a man who wanted his money, but also wanted her to know he wanted it. She had the money today. She had been putting aside small amounts for 3 weeks to clear the account entirely, and she had the sum in her pocket, and she intended to pay it and be done with the particular discomfort of that exchange. She was at the counter when she heard the voice behind her. It was Mrs. Aldrich. She was speaking to the woman beside her, Mrs. Fletcher, who was newer to Rosewood, and still finding her social footing in the lowered but entirely audible tone of a woman who wants to be overheard while maintaining the appearance of a private conversation. "Of course, Maggie Caldwell is pleasant enough," Mrs. Aldrich was saying. "She always has been. Very helpful. But one has to wonder what she's thinking, encouraging the attention of a man like that. A Harrington." A pause. "She's no one after all. No family, no money. He'll move on when he realizes she has nothing to offer someone in his position." Mrs. Fletcher murmured something. "I don't say it unkindly," Mrs. Aldrich continued. "I simply say it honestly. There are women in this county who would be appropriate for William Harrington. Maggie Caldwell, bless her heart, is not among them." Maggie was at the counter. She had heard every word. The baker was looking at her with the expression of a man who had also heard every word and was deciding how to behave about that. She put the money on the counter. "My account," she said quietly. "In full." "Yes, Miss Caldwell," he said. She picked up her bread and turned. She walked past Mrs. Aldrich and Mrs. Fletcher with her head up and her face clear, and she said pleasantly, "Good morning." Mrs. Aldrich looked startled. People always looked startled when Maggie responded to something that was supposed to have been below her notice. Good morning, Maggie." She walked out. She made it half a block before she stopped. She stood on the street and she breathed, and she let the thing she was feeling, the thing that was not quite hurt and not quite anger, and was really just the old, familiar, heavy exhaustion of being evaluated and found insufficient. She let it move through her the way you let bad weather move through, because fighting it only made it stay longer. No family, no money. She had $60 in her pocket once, and she had given it to 4 families who would have lost their homes without it. She had fixed a road for 8 years so that strangers' carriages could travel safely. She had taught 9 children to read, nursed 14 people through illness-mended coats, and fixed shutters, and filled ruts, and shown up every time for a town that had just been told quite audibly in its own bakery that she was no one. She breathed. She was not going to cry on the main street of Rosewood. She absolutely was not. She started walking. She almost walked into William. He was coming from the direction of the inn, and they nearly collided at the corner of Main and Sycamore, and he caught her elbow briefly to steady her, and then released it immediately, with the natural reflex of a man who understood that steadying and holding were different things. He looked at her face. "What happened?" he said. "Nothing," she said. He looked at her. "Maggie." "Mrs. Aldrich had some observations," she said, "about the relative appropriateness of various social situations." She kept her voice even. "It's nothing I haven't heard before in one form or another." "Tell me what she said." "That's not—" "Tell me." She looked at him. She told him. Briefly, accurately, without dramatizing it or minimizing it. He listened with absolutely still face and absolutely focused attention. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Aldrich is a woman who has confused social position with worth for so long that she has lost the ability to distinguish them." Maggie looked at him. "That's a generous interpretation," she said. "It's an accurate one." He met her eyes. "What she said is wrong, Maggie. Not unkind wrong. Factually incorrect. You are not no one. You are the reason 4 families have homes 9 children can read, and the North Road is the best maintained track in this county." He paused. "The fact that Rosewood has failed to understand that is Rosewood's deficiency, not yours." She looked at him for a long moment. "You make it sound simple," she said. "It is simple," he said. "The application of it is what's hard." She exhaled. "William," she said. "What Mrs. Aldrich said, the part about you about what's appropriate, I heard what she said. Then you understand why I'm asking." She looked at him directly. "What is this? What are you actually doing here in Rosewood, walking my rounds and fixing steps and working the North Road with me in the heat?" She paused. "I need to know honestly, because I have been managed by people's good intentions before, and I would rather know the truth plainly than find it out the way I usually find things out after the fact and at cost." He was very still. Then he said, "I am here because you are here, because I came back to find the person who maintained a road and discovered she was a person worth knowing. And I am—" He stopped, started again. "I am being careful because I can see that you have been given reasons to be careful, and the last thing I want is to be another person who asks something of you without offering anything in return." He held her gaze. "But I would be dishonest if I said this was only curiosity. It stopped being only curiosity some time ago." Maggie looked at him. The street was busy around them. She could see Mrs. Burton 2 shops down, who had absolutely noticed this conversation and would have theories about it before noon. She did not particularly care. "Walk with me," she said. "To where? Doesn't matter," she said. "I need to move when I'm thinking." He fell into step beside her. They walked. Yeah. The first real test came the following week. It came in the form of a letter which arrived at the inn for William on a Tuesday morning from a member of his family's legal circle in Richmond. Maggie knew about it because William told her about it directly without being asked, which was becoming a pattern with him that she was beginning to rely on more than she intended to. "My cousin," he said when they met for the morning walk on Wednesday. "He's been managing some of the family's estate matters, and he wants me back in Richmond for a meeting." He paused. "Next week." Maggie walked. "Will you go?" she said. "Yes." He said it simply. "It's legitimate business. It would be irresponsible not to." He paused. "I'll come back." She said nothing. "Maggie." His voice was quiet. "I know that sounds like the thing a person says when they mean the opposite. I know I haven't earned the standing to say it, and have you believe it automatically." He glanced at her. "All I can tell you is that I mean it, and that I'll come back as quickly as the business allows, and that the road will still need tending when I get back." She almost smiled. "The road will be fine," she said. "I know it will," he said. "You'll see to it." She looked at him. "You'll go," she said, "and come back or not. And I'll be here doing what I do, and it will matter or it won't." "It will," he said. She turned and looked at him directly. "How do you know that?" she said. Not sharply, genuinely asking. He held her gaze. "Because," he said, "I have been in a great many places. Margaret Caldwell and I have met a great many people, and I have never once, not once, gone back to a place because I could not stop thinking about it." He paused. "I came back to Rosewood. I'll come back again." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. Once. Briefly. Not giving him everything, but giving him something. "The children have their lesson Thursday," she said. "Ada is nearly through the alphabet. Tell her well done from me," he said. She almost smiled again. This time she let it happen. "Go do your business," she said. "Come back when you can." He left the next morning. Rosewood watched him go with the particular mixed interest of a town that has not yet decided what it thinks. Maggie went to the North Road. She filled 2 ruts that the previous day's rain had opened up, and she thought about what it felt like to have someone who noticed, and she thought about whether noticing was the same as staying, and she thought that she would not know the answer to that until he came back. Or didn't. She kept working. She had always been good at working while she waited. He was gone 9 days. On the 7th day, a small parcel arrived at Maggie's door. Thomas Rosen's boy delivered it shyly with the self-consciousness of a 12-year-old, who understands he is part of something but is not entirely sure what. The parcel contained 3 things: a primer, a good one, newer than anything she had for the Thursday lessons with clear letters and well-organized progressions, a small jar of the specific dark brown thread she had bought from Pearson's Times, 4 enough for all of Mr. Carver's remaining winter coats, and several more besides. And a note. Just a few lines in a hand she was already learning to recognize. "The primer is for Ada. She should have something worthy of what she's learning. The thread is because you'll need it before I get back, and I noticed you bought the last of Pearson's stock. I'm coming back Friday. W." She read the note twice. She set it down. She picked it up and read it a 3rd time. She set it on the kitchen table, and she stood there, and she felt the precise sensation of a wall she had built carefully over many years developing a small, undeniable crack. Not from his station, not from his resources, not from anything he had done or given that was large or visible. From the thread. He had noticed she'd bought the last of the stock. He had thought about it afterward. He had done something about it, without being asked, without mentioning it until it was done. She thought about the road, about the step on Mr. Carver's porch, about the primer for Ada, about the thread. She thought about what it felt like to have someone pay attention to the small things, the quiet, unglamorous, specific small things, in the same way she paid attention to them for others. She thought this is what it feels like. She had not known. She sat down in the kitchen chair, and she pressed her hands flat on the table, and she let herself for the first time in a very long time feel something she had stopped letting herself feel. The fragile, terrifying, completely involuntary beginning of hope. He came back on Friday as he said he would. She was at the North Road when he arrived, and she did not know he was back yet, and she was working because she was always working. That was who she was, and she was no longer apologetic about it, and she heard footsteps. She had already learned to recognize. She did not look up. "The East Bend held," she said. "Good," he said. "There's a new rut forming on the far side, just starting. If we get it early." "Show me," he said. She showed him. They worked for an hour. When they were done, he said, "I told my cousin I'd be spending more time in Rosewood." She leaned on her shovel. "What did he say?" "He said I had lost my mind." William looked at her steadily. "He may be right. I find I don't particularly care." She looked at him. "You told him about Rosewood," she said. "I told him about you," he said simply. "About the road, about the children, about what a person looks like when they have spent 30 years giving without keeping count." He paused. "He said he'd like to meet you." Maggie was quiet. I've never been something someone wanted to tell people about, she said. I know, he said. That's one of the things I intend to correct. She looked at him. This man who had come back as promised on Friday, who had sent thread because he noticed she was low, who had told his cousin about her, as though she were something worth telling. She looked at him, and she thought this might be real. She had learned over 31 years to be careful with that thought. She was being careful, but she was not letting go of it. Ada finished the alphabet, she said. His face changed the particular change that happened when something genuinely pleased him, unperformed and specific. She did. Thursday, all 26. She cried a little afterward, which she was embarrassed about. But I told her the first time you get something you've been working for, crying is a reasonable response. It is, he said. She asked if she could borrow the primer. It's hers, he said. I bought it for her. Maggie looked at him. You don't know her, she said. I know she's been learning to read from someone who hasn't given up on her, he said. That's enough. She held his gaze, and she thought carefully and with full awareness of what she was doing. I am going to let this be real. Not blindly, not without continuing to pay attention. Not without the careful watchfulness of a woman who had learned what carelessness cost. But she was going to stop arguing against it. She was going to let it be what it seemed to be, and see what it became. Come to the lesson Thursday, she said. She'd want to show someone. He nodded. I'll be there, he said. He was. Ada recited the alphabet on Thursday morning without stopping once. She stood at the front of the church back room with the primer open in her hands, though she didn't need it, which everyone in the room knew, and which made the holding of it both unnecessary and entirely understandable. And she went from A to Z in a clear, steady voice that did not waver until the very end when she said Z. And looked up, and the room was so quiet that she thought for one terrible second she had done something wrong. Then Penny Morrison started clapping. The other children followed. Tommy Abernethy clapped with the enthusiastic abandon of a 9-year-old who understood that something significant had happened, even if he wasn't entirely sure what. The two youngest children clapped because everyone else was clapping, and it seemed like the right thing to do. William, standing in the back of the room where Maggie had placed him, with a look that said clearly he was a guest, and guests stood at the back, clapped with the steady, genuine warmth of a man who was actually moved by what he had just seen. Ada looked at Maggie. Did I get them all? She said. Her voice was very small. Every one, Maggie said. Ada's face did the thing it had done on the day D finally made sense, a sudden total brightness, like a lamp being lit from inside. Her eyes went wet, and she pressed her lips together, and she was absolutely not going to cry. She was 7 years old, and she was not going to cry in front of everyone. She cried a little anyway. Maggie crossed the room and crouched down and looked at her directly. I told you, she said. You said crying was reasonable. Ada said with some dignity. I did, Maggie said, and it still is. Ada wiped her face with the back of her hand and stood up straighter. William caught Maggie's eye from the back of the room. She looked at him. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His expression said everything that needed saying, and it said it in a register that was entirely personal and not for the room, and she held it for just a moment before she looked back at Ada. Next, she said to the room, we are going to learn what to do with the alphabet now that we have it. After the lesson, Penny Morrison managed to position herself near William with the focused precision of a 15-year-old who had decided she wanted information and was prepared to be strategic about obtaining it. You came, she said. Miss Caldwell invited me, he said. She doesn't usually invite people to the lessons. I know. Penny looked at him with the direct assessment of a girl who has been taught by a woman who values honesty. Are you going to stay in Rosewood? He glanced at Maggie, who was across the room explaining something to Tommy and not visibly paying attention to this conversation. He looked back at Penny. I intend to, he said. People say things they intend and then don't do them, Penny said. I know they do. Miss Caldwell knows they do too, Penny said. She's had considerable experience with it. He looked at the girl steadily. I know that as well. Penny regarded him. She fixed the shutter on my grandmother's house 2 winters ago, she said. In the cold, alone. My grandmother didn't ask anyone to do it. She mentioned it once sort of to herself, and the next morning the shutter was fixed. A pause. My grandmother didn't even know it was Maggie for 3 weeks, and when she found out she wanted to pay her and Maggie wouldn't take anything. Penny looked at him. That's what she's like. That's who she is. I know, he said. Then you know she deserves someone who notices that, Penny said. Not aggressively, with the precise gravity of a girl who loves the woman who taught her to read and is making a considered assessment of the person in front of her. Not someone who thinks it's charming for a while and then stops noticing. William held her gaze. Miss Morrison, he said, I have been noticing Margaret Caldwell since a winter 2 years ago, when I couldn't stop thinking about a road. I intend to keep noticing. Penny looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded the same brief, decisive nod Maggie used when she had evaluated something and found it acceptable. Good, she said, and walked away. William watched her go. Maggie appeared beside him. What did she say? She asked. She interrogated me, he said. Thoroughly. Did you pass? I believe so. He looked at her. She loves you, you know, in the way that children love someone who changed something fundamental for them. Maggie watched Penny cross the room to help the youngest children put away their slates. She came to me at 13, Maggie said. She couldn't read her own name. Her family. She paused. It wasn't prioritized. And she was bright, terribly bright. And she knew she was being left behind. And she didn't know what to do about it. A pause. She can read anything now. She reads everything. Her mother told me she went through the Reverend's entire library over the winter. William looked at her. You did that, he said. She did that, Maggie said. I just showed her the door. He looked at her for a moment. You do that a great deal, he said. Take less credit than is accurate. I take accurate credit, she said. You take minimum credit, he said, which is not the same thing. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them pushed it further, but it sat between them, the particular productive tension of 2 people who are getting to know each other well enough to disagree productively. The storm came 3 days later. It came the way summer storms come in Virginia fast, with little warning building through the afternoon into something that arrived with full force before supper. By the time dark fell, Rosewood was taking real damage. Maggie heard it from her house, the sound of something structural giving way, 2 streets over, the sound of a roof under more pressure than it could hold. She was out the door before she had consciously made the decision to go. The damage was on the south end of town, which was where the oldest houses were, the houses where the families with the least money lived, the houses that had been maintained on the margins of what was available, patched and repatched, but never quite rebuilt to what they should have been. 3 houses with significant roof damage. 1 with a wall that had partially given way. She worked through the dark. She knew these houses. She knew which families were in them, which children needed to be moved, which structural situations were urgent versus manageable. She organized the immediate problems with the efficient clarity of someone who had been doing this kind of work for so long that it happened in her without requiring deliberate thought. By the time other people arrived, the men from the north end who came when the storm eased and the damage became apparent. The most urgent problems were already addressed. The children from the worst house were in Maggie's neighbor's kitchen. The partially collapsed wall was stabilized with the timber she had found in old Barrett's shed and applied in the method she had learned from watching her father 30 years ago. She was on the roof of the second house when William found her. He came around the corner of the building and looked up, and for a moment he just stood there in the post-storm dark, looking at her on a roof with a hammer in her hand, and her hair entirely loose from the storm wind. And his expression was not the expression of a man surprised by what he was seeing, but of a man who was seeing something he had already known and was having it confirmed. What needs doing, he said. She told him. He did it. They worked for 2 more hours, not talking much because the work did not require talking, and they had reached the stage of being around each other, where silence was functional rather than awkward. When the worst of it was addressed and the families were settled, and the most immediate structural problems were solved for the night, they sat on the step of the second house, and they were both tired in the specific way that comes from physical work done under pressure. "You were here before anyone else," he said. "I heard it start," she said. "Most people heard it start and waited for it to stop." "I know," she said. He looked at her. "Maggie." His voice was quiet in the aftermath quiet of the storm-cleared night. "When did you learn that other people don't do this?" She thought about it. "I'm not sure I ever learned it," she said honestly. "I think I always just did it and gradually understood that not everyone did and kept doing it anyway, because the doing didn't depend on what other people were doing." He was quiet for a moment. "That's remarkable," he said. "It's just how I am," she said. "I know," he said. "That's what makes it remarkable." The following morning, Chairman Howell organized a meeting of the town's men to assess the storm damage and plan the repair effort. Maggie was not invited. This was not a deliberate slight. It was simply the way Rosewood organized things, had always organized things, men meeting to decide, and women executing whatever was decided. Maggie was used to it. She had her own assessment of what needed doing, and she was already doing it by the time the men met at the town hall. William went to the meeting. She found out what happened there from 3 different sources before noon. The first source was Thomas Rosen's boy, who told her breathlessly that Mr. Harrington had said something at the meeting that made Chairman Howell go red in the face. The second source was Donnelly from the stable, who told her that Mr. Harrington had stood up in that meeting and said things that needed saying, and that some of the men had looked ashamed, and some had looked annoyed, and old Carver had said, "Hear, hear," from the back. The third source was William himself, who found her at the collapsed wall house mid-morning and told her directly. "I told them," he said, "that the most urgent work last night was done by one person before any of them arrived. I told them that this was consistent with a pattern I had observed since arriving in Rosewood. And I told them that before they organized their repair effort, they might consider acknowledging that one person had been running an informal repair effort for this town for the better part of a decade without compensation or recognition." Maggie set down the timber she was holding. She turned and looked at him. "You said that," she said. "Yes." "In the town meeting?" "Yes." "William." She looked at him steadily. "I did not ask you to do that." "No," he said. "You didn't. I have been managing my position in this town for 30 years without—" "I know that," he said. "And I am not suggesting you couldn't continue to manage it. I am saying I was not willing to sit in a room full of men discussing storm repair while knowing that the woman who had done the most effective storm response in Rosewood's recent history was not in the room and was not going to be acknowledged in the room unless someone said something." He held her gaze. "I said something." She looked at him. She felt complicated things. She felt the instinctive resistance of a person who has managed their own affairs for so long that any intervention feels like interference. She felt underneath that something else, a complicated warmth, the particular disorientation of someone who has been protecting themselves from needing people for so long that being helped lands strangely. "How did they respond?" she said. "Howell was embarrassed," William said. "Several of the others were as well. Old Carver said it was past time someone said it. A man named Aldrich." He paused. "He said that Maggie had always been well regarded in Rosewood, that everyone appreciated her contributions. And," she said. She knew that tone. She had heard it in her sleep. "I said that appreciation without acknowledgement was a comfortable arrangement for the person being appreciative and a rather less comfortable one for the person being appreciated." Maggie was quiet. "Aldrich's wife," she said, "told someone last week that I was no one." "I know." "You know." "Penny told me." She looked at him. "She told you," Maggie said. "She told me because she thought I should know everything relevant." He paused. She was right. Maggie sat down on the step of the house she had been repairing. She sat there, and she thought about what it felt like to have someone stand up in a room she was not allowed into and say something that needed saying. Not perfectly, she would have said it differently herself, would have been more careful with the Howell relationship, would have thought about the downstream social effects, but he had said it, without being asked. "William," she said. He waited. "I need to tell you something." "All right." She looked up at him. "I have spent 30 years not asking anyone for anything," she said. "I have spent 30 years being self-sufficient is the polite word. The more accurate word is alone. Alone in the specific way of a person who has decided that needing people is a vulnerability they can't afford." She paused. "I am not sure I know how to let someone—" She stopped. "I am not sure I know how to receive what you are offering. I'm not saying that's your fault. I'm saying it's a fact about me." He came and sat beside her on the step. Not close. The appropriate distance of a man who understood that proximity was a statement. "I'm not in a hurry," he said. "You should be probably," she said. "You have an estate in Harrington County. You have a life that is not in Rosewood." "I have a life," he said. "The location is adjustable." She looked at him. "You can't move your life to Rosewood," she said. "I didn't say Rosewood," he said quietly. "I said the location is adjustable." She held his gaze. Her heart was doing something she did not entirely approve of. "I need time," she said. "I know," he said. "Not because I'm not—" She stopped, started again. "Not because I don't— Maggie." His voice was gentle and absolutely steady. "I know. Take the time." She breathed. Around them, Rosewood was beginning to stir into its post-storm assessment. People coming out to look at damage, voices calling across the street. The particular energy of a community, reckoning with what the night had taken. And for the first time in 31 years, Margaret Caldwell sat in the middle of it and felt not invisible, but present. Specifically, deliberately, undeniably present. It was frightening. It was also quietly exactly what she had not known she had been waiting for.
Wahab said.
The twist arrived on a Tuesday, and it arrived from the last direction Maggie expected. She was at the Reverend's house. Reverend Mills had been ill for a week, a persistent chest cold that was not serious, but needed management. And she had been bringing remedies and checking on him every other day. When Mrs. Mills, a small anxious woman, who managed the Reverend's household and social calendar, with the focused urgency of someone who believed everything was approximately 3 minutes from disaster, came in from the hall with a letter in her hand and a particular expression on her face. "Margaret," she said, "this came for the Reverend this morning, from the county board." She held it with the caution of a woman who suspects the contents. "It's about the school." Maggie looked at her. "What school?" "The church room," Mrs. Mills said. "Your lessons?" She held out the letter. "I think you should read it." Maggie read it. It was a formal letter from the County Board of Rosewood Township, signed by Chairman Howell, informing Reverend Mills that the use of the church back room for informal educational purposes had come under review, and that the board had determined the space should be reserved for official church functions, only effective at the end of the month. Maggie read it twice. She set it down on the table. "When did this come?" she said. "This morning," Mrs. Mills said. She was twisting her hands. "Margaret, it doesn't say your name." "But—" "I know what it says," Maggie said. She stood up. "Tell the Reverend when he wakes that I'll call tomorrow," she said. "He's through the worst of it. Keep him warm and don't let him go outside until Thursday." She left. She walked straight to the town hall. Chairman Howell was in his office, which she knew because she could see through the window that his lamp was lit and his hat was on the hook, and she walked through the door of the building and down the hall and knocked on his door with the particular knock of a woman who intends to have a conversation. "Come in," Howell said. She came in. He looked up. His face moved through several things quickly, surprise, discomfort, and a careful rearrangement into something more official. "Miss Caldwell," he said. "The letter to Reverend Mills," she said. She closed the door. "The back room." He cleared his throat. The board has been reviewing the use of church facilities for... Who requested the review? He paused. The board acts as a collective. Who requested the review? Chairman Howell. He pressed his lips together. There were concerns, he said, raised by several members of the community about the appropriateness of certain ongoing informal arrangements that have not been formally authorized. I have been using that room with Reverend Mills's blessing for 4 years, she said. 6 children learn to read there. They have no other option. She held his gaze. Who raised the concern? Howell looked at his desk, then at her, then at his desk again. Mrs. Aldrich, he said finally. And 1 or 2 others. Maggie was quiet. She thought about Mrs. Aldrich saying she was no one. She thought about how small a thing it was, a back room 6 children Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and how much it mattered specifically to those 6 children. She thought about Ada and the alphabet. I see, she said. She turned toward the door. Miss Caldwell. Howell's voice was different, quieter. The voice of a man who is used to conducting himself in official registers and is briefly departing from one. For what it's worth, the letter was not my idea, and I have been... He stopped. I have been reconsidering several things since the meeting this week. She turned back. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who has recently been told something uncomfortable and is in the process of deciding whether to let it change him. The room, he said. I don't think the board would formally object to a continued arrangement if it were structured differently, with some official standing, a formal authorization perhaps from the board itself. He paused. That would make it harder for any individual member to raise a concern. Maggie looked at him. You're offering official authorization for the lessons, she said. I'm suggesting it might be available, he said carefully. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because Harrington said something in that meeting that I have been thinking about since he said. And because I drove my cart down the North Road this morning, and it really occurred to me for the first time, that road is better than any other road in this county, and I do not know a single person who has ever done a thing to maintain it. He met her eyes. I think I have been a man who accepted things without asking how they got done. I would like to be a different kind of man. Maggie looked at Chairman Howell, a man she had known for 20 years, who had read 12 names at the celebration and not included hers, who was now sitting in his office, telling her he wanted to be different. She thought about whether she believed him. She thought about the fact that people were capable of change when something reached them. She thought about the 6 children. Formal authorization from the board, she said, in writing, with the specific room and the specific days named. I'll draft it this week, he said. And I would like it noted, she said, that the lessons are open to any child in Rosewood regardless of family means. He nodded. And I would like it signed, she said, by you and 2 other board members, not just you. The board formally, as you said. He looked at her. Done, he said. She nodded. She left. She was halfway down the hall before she allowed herself to feel what was happening in her chest. The compressed, complicated sensation of something that had been invisible for a long time becoming incrementally visible. She found William at the inn. She did not ordinarily seek him out. She had maintained a practice of letting him come to her, which was partly caution and partly the specific self-protection of a woman who had learned that running toward things she wanted had historically been a way of losing them faster. Today, she went to the inn. Thomas Rosen showed her to the small room off the main hall, where William had been meeting with a correspondence that had followed him from Richmond, and William looked up when she came in and read her face, in the way he had been reading her face for weeks. He put down his pen. What happened? He said. She told him. All of it. Mrs. Mills and the letter, and Howell, and the conversation, and the formal authorization. He listened without interrupting, which was what he did. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You went to Howell directly, he said. Yes? Alone? Yes. He nodded slowly. And you got what you needed. I got what the children needed, she said. Which is what matters. He looked at her with the expression she had come to associate with moments when something genuinely moved him. "I want to say something," he said, "and I want to say it correctly." She waited. "I said something in that meeting because I thought it needed saying," he said. "But I want to be clear. I know you don't need me to fight your battles. You walked into Howell's office and handled this yourself, as you have handled everything yourself for 30 years. He held her gaze. "What I did in that meeting was not because I thought you couldn't. It was because I was in a room where something wrong was being normalized, and I was not willing to be in that room and say nothing." He paused. "There's a difference between defending someone because they can't defend themselves and standing beside someone because what's being said is wrong. I was doing the second, not the first." Maggie looked at him. She thought about the distinction he was drawing. She thought about how important that distinction was, how essential. How many times in her life someone had stepped in on her behalf in the first way, the way that made her smaller, that turned her help into charity, and how entirely different this felt. "I know," she said. "I know the difference." "Good," he said. "William." She looked at him steadily. "I told you I needed time." "Yes. I have been thinking about what I'm actually afraid of," she said. "When I say I need time, I have been trying to be honest about it." She paused. "I'm not afraid you'll leave. Not primarily. I think you're a man who does what he says." She paused again. "I'm afraid that if I let someone in fully the way you're asking, I won't know who I am without the walls." She held his gaze. "I have been building walls for 30 years. I'm not sure what's on the inside of them." He was very quiet. "I know what's on the inside of them," he said. "How can you know that?" "Because I have been watching you for weeks," he said. "And walls don't fix roads. Walls don't teach children their alphabet. Walls don't give $60 to families they'll never get credit for helping." He looked at her. "What's on the inside of those walls, Maggie, is the most generous and capable and real person I have encountered in 45 years of living. The walls aren't protecting that. They're just keeping it company." She breathed. She looked at this man. She thought about 31 years of being useful and invisible. About the road and the roofs and the lessons and the $60. About the shutter on Hester's house in the summer heat. About 12 names on a list, and hers not among them. About Ada's face when Dee finally made sense. She thought about what it would mean to stop protecting herself from something that might be real. She thought about the thread. 4 spools of dark brown thread, because he had noticed she was running low. "I have one more condition," she said. He waited. "If this is what it seems to be," she said, "then I need it to be between equals. Not you taking care of me, not me becoming someone who requires management. 2 people who see each other and say so." She held his gaze. "I spent 30 years invisible. I don't want to trade that for being decorative. Or rescued." "I don't want to rescue you," he said. "I want to know you. There's a difference." "Yes," she said. "There is." She held his gaze. "Then," she said slowly, carefully, with the particular precision of someone stepping onto uncertain ground and testing it before committing, "perhaps we continue as we have been, and see what it is." He looked at her. And something in his face, something that had been careful and patient and restrained for weeks, relaxed slightly. Just slightly. The way something relaxes when it has been holding a long time and is finally given permission to rest. "Yes," he said. "That." Outside, Rosewood was going about its ordinary business. And inside this small room off the main hall of the Rosen Inn, something that had been growing quietly in plain sight, the way most important things grow, took one more deliberate step forward. Neither of them made much of it. Some things are better grown than announced. The formal authorization came from the county board on a Friday. Howell delivered it himself, which Maggie had not expected. He came to the church back room during the Thursday lesson. She had continued the lessons through the week, regardless of the pending authorization, because the children did not deserve to pay for adult politics with their education. And he stood in the doorway with the document in his hand, and waited until she noticed him. She noticed him. She crossed the room and took the document and read it in front of him, which she did deliberately because she had learned that reading things in front of the person who delivered them established immediately whether the content matched what was promised. It matched. 4 signatures. The room named specifically. Tuesday and Thursday mornings open to all children in Rosewood Township regardless of family means. Official board authorization effective immediately and continuing indefinitely pending formal review no sooner than 2 years hence. She looked up at Howell. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He started to turn. "Chairman Howell." He stopped. She looked at him. "The road. The North Bend especially needs attention after the storm. The county keeps a maintenance budget. It's never been applied to the North Road." He looked at her. "I'll look into it," he said. "I'd appreciate that," she said. He left. Penny Morrison had been watching from across the room with the expression of someone witnessing something she intends to remember. When Maggie turned back to the lesson, Penny said quietly, "You just got 2 things at once." "The road needed doing," Maggie said. "I was there." "You're always there," Penny said. Maggie looked at her. "Someone has to be," she said. William heard about the authorization that afternoon when Maggie told him on the Thursday walk. She told him matter-of-factly, in the way she told him most things precisely, without dramatizing the accomplishment, moving quickly to what needed doing next. He listened. When she finished, he said, "The road." "The county has a budget," she said. "It's been misapplied. I simply pointed that out. You asked Howell for county maintenance funds for a road you've been maintaining alone for 8 years. He said, "Yes." In the same conversation where he delivered the authorization he already owed you. "The timing was practical," she said. He looked at her with an expression she was coming to understand meant he was both amused and genuinely impressed, 2 things he rarely showed simultaneously. "Maggie," he said, "that was excellent." "It was obvious," she said. He was already there. The conversation was already happening. "Most people don't see the obvious until after," he said. She thought about that. "Maybe," she said. "I've had a lot of practice noticing what's in front of me." A pause. "When no one else is looking, you get very good at looking yourself." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's going to change, you know." She glanced at him. "What is the no one else looking part?" he said. She said nothing, but she did not argue with it, which was something. 3 days later, a letter arrived from Richmond. Not from William's cousin this time. From a man named Prescott, one of William's business associates connected to the Harrington family's legal and property interests, in the way that such men were connected through years of transactions and mutual benefit. The letter was addressed to William at the Rosen Inn. Maggie did not see it, but she felt its arrival in the change that came over William when they met on Friday morning. He was present entirely. He was always present. That was one of the fundamental things about him, but there was something additional in his manner. A layer of consideration that had not been there Thursday. She waited. He told her before noon. "Prescott wants to meet," he said. They were walking the south end of town, checking the remaining storm damage with the systematic attention they had developed together. "In Richmond. He has a time-sensitive matter regarding the Harrington estate's financial arrangement with a business interest in the valley." Maggie kept walking. "When?" she said. "He's asking for next week." A pause. "It's not a request I can easily decline. The matter is..." He paused again. "It's complicated. Prescott has managed a significant portion of the estate's business relationships for 15 years. Declining him without good reason would cause problems that extend beyond the immediate situation." She nodded. "Then go," she said. "Maggie." "You went to Richmond before," she said. "You came back. This is the same." "It's not quite the same," he said quietly. She stopped walking. She turned and looked at him. "Why isn't it the same?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "Because Prescott's letter is not entirely about the valley business," he said. He mentions that there has been some conversation among the family's social circle about my extended stay in Rosewood. He paused. He mentions a woman named Eleanor Cavendish, whose family has adjacent property to the Harrington estate, and there has apparently been a long-standing assumption among certain people that Eleanor and I were a natural. He stopped. It is not an assumption I have ever endorsed, but it exists, and Prescott is informing me that Eleanor's father has made inquiries. Maggie looked at him. She heard all of it. She heard what he was saying, and she heard what he was not saying, and she took a moment to organize what she actually felt about it before she said anything, because she had learned that organizing your feelings before speaking was considerably more useful than the alternative. So, she said, there is a woman in Richmond whose family expects something. There is a woman, he said, who I have never courted, never indicated interest in, and have no intention of, William. Her voice was calm. I am not angry. I'm not... She paused. I'm asking you to tell me the full truth of the situation, not the edited version, the full one. He held her gaze. The full truth, he said, is that Eleanor Cavendish is a pleasant woman from a good family, and the assumption has existed because we are both unmarried and our properties are adjacent, and those facts in Virginia's landed society are considered sufficient basis for assumption. He paused. The full truth is also that I have spent approximately zero of my recent thinking on Eleanor Cavendish, and approximately all of it on Rosewood. On you. He met her eyes. The full truth is that I am going to Richmond to tell Prescott exactly that, and to make it clear to anyone who has constructed an assumption that the assumption is incorrect. Maggie breathed. You're going to Richmond to tell your business associate that you've been in Rosewood for a month, pursuing a woman with no family money and no social standing, she said. Not bitterly, just accurately. I'm going to Richmond to manage my estate's business and make my position clear on a social assumption that has gotten ahead of reality, he said. Those are two separate things that happen to require the same trip. She looked at him for a long moment. What is your position, she said, on the assumption? He looked at her with the directness that she had come to understand was not a performance. It was simply how he operated. My position, he said, is that I am not interested in Eleanor Cavendish. My position is that I am interested in you, and that this is not a recent development and is not going to change because Prescott's letter mentions someone's father's inquiries. He paused. My position is that I came back to Rosewood once already, and I intend to come back again, and if you would like to know how many times I intend to keep coming back. Once more would be sufficient for now, she said, something released in his expression. Once more, he said, and after that we'll discuss the following time. She nodded. Go handle your business, she said. Come back when it's done. By Thursday, he said. The lesson is Thursday, she said. Ada has been working on her first words. Full words, not just letters. I'll be back for the lesson, he said. He left the following morning. He had been gone 2 days when Rosewood turned on her. Not cruelly, not deliberately. In the specific way that small towns manage when they have been observing something they don't know how to process and have finally decided to have an opinion about it. The opinion arrived, as opinions often did in Rosewood, through Mrs. Aldrich. Maggie was at the bakery. She had a standing order on Friday mornings for the Abernethy family bread that she paid for herself, which Sarah Abernethy accepted with the graceful dignity of a woman who has stopped arguing when Mrs. Aldrich came in with her daughter and positioned herself at the counter in the way of a woman who has something to say and has calculated that a semi-public location provides both audience and plausible deniability. I heard Mr. Harrington has gone to Richmond, Mrs. Aldrich said, not to Maggie, to the baker, in the carrying voice of a woman who knows her volume. So I understand, the baker said, to attend to family business. A pause. And to address some matters regarding the Cavendish family, I believe. Eleanor Cavendish. Another pause. Such a suitable match. Adjacent properties, old families, very natural. Maggie did not look up from the bread she was selecting. I always thought he would end up with someone from his own circle. Mrs. Aldrich continued. A man of that standing after all. A pause. It's kind of him to have spent time in Rosewood. I imagine it was pleasant, a change of scenery. She sighed slightly. Though of course he has responsibilities, his own world to return to. Maggie paid for the bread. She picked up her parcel. She looked at Mrs. Aldrich. Good morning, Mrs. Aldrich, she said pleasantly. Mrs. Aldrich had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. Good morning, Maggie. She left. She walked to Sarah Abernethy's with the bread, and she delivered it, and she chatted with Tommy, who was fully recovered and had been practicing his letters with the single-minded devotion of a boy who had discovered he was good at something and was determined to prove it to himself repeatedly. She complimented his progress. She meant it. Then she went home. She sat in her kitchen and she thought about what Mrs. Aldrich had said. Not because she believed it. She did not believe it, not precisely not in the constructed social narrative form in which it had been delivered. She thought about it because underneath the social narrative was a real question, and she was a person who did not avoid real questions. The real question was, what does she actually know about his world? She knew William. She was increasingly certain of that. She knew how he moved and what he noticed, and the quality of his attention, and the specific way he said her name when he meant the actual person and not the social function. She knew he fixed steps without mentioning it, and sent thread because he noticed she was low, and came back when he said he would. But she did not know Richmond. She did not know the Harrington estate. She did not know what it looked like to be Margaret Caldwell in that world. Not invisible, not forgotten, but simply foreign, out of her context. Without the roads she had built and the children she taught and the 30 years of accumulated knowing where things were that made her competent here. She thought, what if I am only who I am in Rosewood? She had not thought that before. She sat with it. Penny Morrison came by on Tuesday. She did not always come by outside of lesson days, but she had a letter she said her mother wanted Maggie to see about some church arrangements, which was plausible enough as a reason even if the letter seemed secondary to the visit. She sat in Maggie's kitchen with the ease of a girl who had been sitting in this kitchen for 2 years, and she set the letter on the table and did not mention it again, and instead said, You look like you're thinking too hard about something. I'm thinking the appropriate amount, Maggie said, about Mr. Harrington. Penny. You are, though. Maggie looked at the girl. What do you think about all of this? She said. It came out before she fully intended it. Penny looked surprised not by the question itself, but by the fact that she was being asked it. Then she settled into the seriousness of someone taking a real question seriously. I think, she said carefully, that he's the first person who has ever come to Rosewood looking for you specifically. Not looking for someone to help them. Not looking for something you could provide. Looking for you. She paused. And I think you've spent so long being useful that someone looking for you, just you, not your usefulness, feels like it must be wrong somehow, like there must be a catch. Maggie said nothing. Is there a catch? Penny said. Eleanor Cavendish, Maggie said. Penny looked at her with the directness of youth. Does he want Eleanor Cavendish? He says no. Do you believe him? Maggie thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. Then what's the actual problem? Maggie was quiet. I don't know who I am outside of Rosewood, she said. I have spent 30 years building a life here, a specific particular life that fits this place and these people. And if I... She stopped. If I let this become what it seems to be becoming, I would be in his world. I would be starting over. Without the road. Without the children. Without the 30 years of knowing what needs doing and doing it. Penny looked at her steadily. Miss Caldwell, she said, you taught me to read. You taught me that knowing how to read doesn't just work in your front room. It goes everywhere with you. That what you learn becomes part of who you are, and you take it with you. She paused. You don't think you'd take yourself with you? Maggie looked at the girl. Penny sat with the slightly embarrassed expression of someone who has said something more profound than they intended and is not sure what to do with the silence that follows. I'm 15, she said. I'm probably wrong." "You're probably not," Maggie said. She was quiet for a moment. She thought about Ada and the alphabet, about what she had said to Ada about crying the first time you get something you've been working for, about what she had told Tommy about letters, that they follow you, they don't stay in the room where you learned them. She had been teaching that for 4 years. She had not been applying it to herself. William came back on Wednesday, not Thursday. Wednesday evening, a day ahead of the lesson, and when Maggie opened her door and found him on the step, hat in hand, with the slightly road-worn quality of a man who has traveled without stopping for rest, the first thing he said was, "Prescott understands my position." She looked at him. "And Eleanor Cavendish," she said. "Her father has been informed through Prescott that there is no basis for any arrangement and that I am settled on the matter." He held her gaze. Eleanor herself, for what it's worth, told her father she had never considered it anyway, and that she had been trying to discourage the assumption for 3 years. He paused. "I thought you should know that. She was never part of what Prescott was managing. It was their father's." Maggie looked at him. "You came back early," she said. "The business was completed yesterday morning," he said. "I saw no reason to stay." She opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "I'll make coffee." He came in. He sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she had pressed her hands flat the morning after the bakery, the morning she had decided to let something be real, and he put his hat on the chair beside him, and he looked at her kitchen with the easy attention of a man who has been allowed into someone's actual space and understands what that means. She made coffee. She set it on the table. She sat across from him. "I have been thinking," she said. "All right," he said, "about what I told you, about not knowing who I am outside of Rosewood." She held her coffee cup in both hands. "I have been sitting with that all week, and I think I was asking the wrong question." He waited. "I was asking what I would be without Rosewood," she said. "Without the road and the children and the 30 years. As though those things were external. Things I had accumulated that could be taken away, and then there would be nothing left." She paused. "But they're not external. They're how I know myself. The road isn't what I am, it's evidence of what I am. The children aren't who I am. They're what happens when who I am meets a need." She looked at him. "I take myself with me, wherever I go." He was very still. "Yes," he said quietly. "You do." "I know that sounds obvious," she said. "It sounds like something you worked out honestly," he said. "That's not obvious. That's rare." She looked at him. "I'm not saying I'm ready for anything specific," she said carefully. "I'm saying I've been afraid of the wrong thing, and I wanted you to know that." A pause. "Because you asked me to stop protecting myself from something that might be real. And I think I am." He held her gaze. "That's enough," he said. "For now, that's more than enough." She nodded. They drank their coffee in the kitchen that was hers, that she had maintained alone for 30 years, that was full of the particular evidence of a life built carefully and without help. And it felt for the first time not like the evidence of solitude. It felt like the beginning of something shared. The proposal came 3 weeks later. It came without ceremony, which was consistent with everything else about William, and it came in the middle of a completely ordinary moment, which Maggie had learned was where all the most important things tended to happen. They were at the North Road. She was checking the maintenance that the county had finally applied. The county crew had come through the previous week with actual materials and actual labor, which was the first time in 8 years that the road had received any attention other than hers. And she was assessing their work with the particular critical attention of a person who knows a thing thoroughly and is evaluating whether someone else has done it adequately. They had done it adequately. She was relieved and slightly disappointed, which was the complicated feeling that comes when you hand over something you have owned alone for a long time and discover that the world can in fact manage without you carrying it entirely. "It's good," she said. "It is." William agreed. "They didn't get the far corner right," she said. "But it'll hold through autumn. I'll look at it in spring." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, still looking at the road, "Marry me." She turned and looked at him. He was not on one knee. He was not holding anything. He was standing on the north road of Rosewood, Virginia, in the summer heat with his hat on and his hands in his pockets, looking at her with the same steady directness he brought to everything. "Not because you need me," he said. "Not because you need anything. You have made abundantly clear that you do not need anything, which is both true and one of the things I most—" He stopped, started again. "Marry me because you want to. Because what we are is something worth choosing. Because I have been here for 2 months, and in those 2 months I have not wanted to be anywhere else, and I think that is not likely to change." He held her gaze. "Marry me because it would be good. Not perfect. I'm not offering perfect. I wouldn't insult you with perfect. But good and honest and real." Maggie looked at him. She felt the wall. She felt it clearly, the specific sensation of 31 years of careful, necessary self-protection of the walls that had been both prison and shelter of the person who had decided a very long time ago that needing people was a vulnerability she couldn't afford. She felt it. And then she felt something else. She felt herself on the other side of it. She had been on the other side of it for some time, she realized. She just hadn't let herself notice. "No," she said. His face changed. "Not yet," she said. I'm not saying no permanently. I'm saying not yet." He exhaled. "Tell me why," he said. His voice was steady, but she could hear what it cost to keep it that way. "Because I spent 30 years waiting for someone to see me," she said, "and I found that I cannot spend another day forgetting to see myself." She held his gaze. These past months I have been relearning who I am. What I actually want, not what I'm needed for, not what I'm useful for. What I want." She paused. "And I am not finished with that yet. I need to know that what I'm choosing is because I want it, and not because I'm grateful for it." He was quiet. "There's a difference," she said, "between being grateful and choosing. I refuse to confuse them." He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about that. Then he nodded. Once, slowly. "How long?" he said. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I'm not playing for time. I'm not putting you off, William. I'm asking you to wait until I can say yes and mean it the way it deserves to be meant." He looked at her. "All right," he said. "All right," she repeated. "I'll be in Rosewood," he said. "I can conduct the estate business from here through the winter. I had Prescott arrange it." He said it without drama as a fact. "I'm not going anywhere." She stared at him. "You arranged—" "Last week," he said. I wasn't assuming. I wasn't arranging it to pressure you." He met her eyes. "I arranged it because I wanted to be here, because this is where I want to be. The answer to my question doesn't change that." She looked at him. She thought about the thread, about the step, about the primer, about a man who did things without announcing them, and who had just told her he had rearranged his estate business so he could stay in a small Virginia town through the winter, because this was where he wanted to be. Not where she was, where he wanted to be. "You're staying," she said. "I'm staying," he said. She felt the wall. She felt herself on the other side of it. She breathed. "Then stay," she said. "And we'll see." He put his hat back on. "We'll see," he said. They walked back to town the way they had walked every morning for 2 months, side by side at the same pace, with the easy silence of people who have learned each other well enough that silence is not a gap, but a presence. Rosewood received them the way it received everything about them, with the particular mixture of attention and confusion of a community that has been watching something it cannot quite categorize. Maggie walked through it with her head up. She had been invisible for 31 years. She was not invisible anymore. And the woman walking beside William Harrington on the main street of Rosewood, Virginia, in the summer of 1817, was not the same woman who had fixed a shutter alone in the heat while a celebration went on 2 streets over. She was someone that woman had been building quietly without knowing it. She was someone worth choosing. She just needed a little more time to choose herself first. William stayed. That was the first thing, the foundational thing, and Rosewood spent approximately 2 weeks deciding what to make of it before settling into the uncomfortable recognition that he simply meant what he had said. He was not leaving. He had arranged his affairs to remain through the winter. He came to the morning lessons on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He walked the North Road. He sat in old Carver's kitchen and listened to stories about Rosewood 20 years prior, and he conducted his estate correspondence from the small desk at the Rosen Inn with the quiet efficiency of a man who had decided where he wanted to be and arranged everything else accordingly. Rosewood had not known what to do with Maggie for 31 years. It did not know what to do with this either. It watched. Maggie let it watch. She had stopped managing the town's perception of her with the same vigilance she had once applied to it. Not from carelessness, from a quiet, growing recognition that a life spent arranging herself to be acceptable to people who weren't paying attention anyway was a considerable waste of energy. She put that energy elsewhere. She put it into the school. The formal authorization had changed something she had not anticipated. She had expected it to change the children's situation, more security, more stability, fewer mornings of low-level anxiety about whether the room would still be available. What she had not expected was what it changed in the town's relationship to the lessons. When something has official standing, people see it differently. It was that simple and that infuriating, but Maggie was a practical woman, and she accepted the mechanism even when she found it frustrating. 3 new children enrolled in the first week after the authorization. 2 more the week after. By October, she had 14 students, 14, which was more than the subscription school on the main street and which required her to rethink the entire structure of how the lessons ran. She was at her kitchen table on a Sunday working through how to reorganize the time when she heard the knock. William. She opened the door. He had his coat on and his hat, and the particular expression of a man who has been thinking about something and has decided to say it. "I have a proposal," he said. Not that proposal, a practical one. She stepped back to let him in. He sat at the kitchen table, her kitchen table, which he had sat at enough times now that it had stopped feeling like his presence there was remarkable, and he put a piece of paper in front of her. She looked at it. It was a rough sketch, a building. Small 2 rooms with a notation about windows on the east side for morning light. "A schoolhouse," he said. She looked at it. "I know you're managing in the church room," he said, "and I know you'll continue to manage because you manage everything. But 14 children in a church back room is not a school. It's a workaround." He met her eyes. "I'd like to build you a school." She looked at the sketch. She thought about their church room, the way the light came through the single window, the way the older children had to fold themselves onto benches made for smaller people, the way she had to rotate the students through different activities because there was simply not enough space for everyone to work at the same time. She thought about 2 rooms, morning light. "That's a significant," she started. "Yes," he said, "it is." "William, I can't let you. I'm not offering it as a gift to you," he said. "I'm proposing it as an investment in Rosewood. The town should have a proper school. The town has not built one because no one has organized the effort." He held her gaze. "You would organize it. I would fund the materials. The men of the town can provide the labor. Howell owes this community at least that much, and he knows it." He paused. "It would be a Rosewood school, not a Harrington charity." She looked at the sketch. She thought about Ada, who was writing full sentences now. About Tommy, who was working through numbers with the focused determination of a boy who had decided arithmetic was a personal challenge. About Penny, who had moved so far past what Maggie could teach her that she was now helping teach the others. 14 children, 2 rooms, morning light. "Let me see the east window placement again," she said. He turned the paper. She studied it. "Closer to the corner," she said. "If it's too centered, the light will fall wrong in winter." He picked up his pen and adjusted the sketch. She watched him do it. She thought, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like when someone sees what you're doing and moves to support it without making it about themselves. "All right," she said. He looked up. "All right," she said again, "but I talked to Howell. I set the terms with the labor. This is a community effort, and I am the one who knows this community." "Completely," he said. "And the school's charter, when it has one, lists the contributing parties as the Rosewood community, not as a Harrington donation." He nodded. "And," she said. And she said the last part more quietly. "Thank you." He looked at her. "You're welcome," he said, and said nothing more about it. That was the thing. He never said more about it than was needed. She went to Howell on Monday. He was in his office, and he looked up when she came in, and his expression had the settled quality of a man who had been recalibrating for months and was no longer surprised by what walked through his door. "Miss Caldwell," he said. "The school," she said. She sat down and put the sketch on his desk. "Rosewood needs a proper building. I have funding for the materials. I need the town's labor." He looked at the sketch. He looked at it for a long time. "Where does the funding come from?" he said. "A private donor who wishes to see Rosewood's children properly educated and does not need his name on the building to accomplish that." Howell looked at her steadily. "Harrington," he said. She said nothing. He pressed his lips together. Then he looked at the sketch again. "The Aldrich brothers," he said slowly. "They built the Morrison barn last spring. They know what they're doing with timber frame." A pause. "And Barrett has seasoned lumber he's been sitting on for 2 years that I know he'd move at a reasonable price." He tapped the sketch. "The east window placement is good for morning light." She did not say she had moved it herself. "How many weeks?" she said. "4 if we start before the cold sets in." He looked up. "I'll call a town meeting this week. Put it to the men directly." A pause. "I think most of them will come." She nodded. "Chairman Howell." She stood. "When it's done, when the school is built, I want it understood that it belongs to the town, not to the donor, not to the board, to the children of Rosewood." He looked at her. "Understood," he said. She left. She was 3 steps down the hall when she heard him say quietly to himself, or to the room, or to something she was not supposed to hear, "Should have done this years ago." She kept walking. Hi. The town meeting was on Wednesday. Maggie was there. This was different from the anniversary celebration, different from the board meetings where her name was not on the list and her presence was not anticipated. This was a meeting she had called in practical terms through Howell, and her presence was not incidental. She sat in the 3rd row. William sat in the back, which was where she had asked him to sit, because she needed this to be a Rosewood decision, and his presence at the front of the room would complicate that. He sat in the back without complaint. Howell presented the proposal. The building, the materials, the labor requirement, the timeline. He presented it straightforwardly, which she had asked him to do. No speeches, no embellishment, just the practical facts of what was needed and what was available. The room discussed it. The Aldrich brothers had opinions about the timber frame, which were technical and useful. Old Barrett confirmed the lumber. 3 other men volunteered specific skills. A woman named Mrs. Graves, who Maggie had never heard speak at a public meeting, stood up and said that her husband was a glazier and could manage the windows at cost. The vote was not close, 31 in favor. 2 abstentions, one of which Maggie strongly suspected was Mrs. Aldrich's husband voting as a proxy for his wife's ongoing reservations. 0 against. Maggie sat in the 3rd row and listened to Rosewood vote to build a school for its children, and she felt something she could not immediately name. She named it later, sitting with it in her kitchen. She felt witnessed, not celebrated, not elevated to something she wasn't, simply witnessed. The way it feels when people finally look at what has been there all along and say yes, that is worth doing. But the twist came the following week, and it came from a direction she had not anticipated. A letter arrived for her, not for William, not at the inn, but at her house, addressed to her by name, in a hand she did not recognize. The return mark was Richmond. She opened it. It was from a woman named Mrs. Prescott, wife of the same Prescott who managed William's estate business, a woman Maggie had never met and had no particular reason to know. The letter was 2 pages. The first page was an introduction. Cordial. Careful, the letter of a woman who was not certain of her reception and was being appropriately cautious. She explained that she had heard about Maggie from her husband, who had heard about her from William, who had apparently, and here Mrs. Prescott's tone shifted to something warmer and more direct, spoken of her with a specificity and consistency that had caught her husband's attention and subsequently hers. The second page was the reason for the letter. Mrs. Prescott ran together with two other women in Richmond, a small lending library privately funded accessible to women and children who could not afford the subscription libraries operated out of a building her family owned on a secondary street. She had been running it for 4 years. She was looking for someone to advise on expanding it, on the organizational and financial management of such an expansion. Someone who understood from personal experience both the value of education access and the practical management of small institutions that operated on limited resources. William had given her Maggie's name. She would like to meet if Maggie was willing. She would travel to Rosewood, or they could arrange a neutral location entirely at Maggie's convenience. Maggie read the letter twice. She set it down. She picked it up and read the second page again. She went to find William. He was at the inn with his correspondence, and he looked up when she came in and read her face and said, "You got Mrs. Prescott's letter." "You gave her my name," she said. "Yes. You told a woman in Richmond, a woman with an established institution and resources and connections, that she should consult a woman in Rosewood who runs a backroom school for children who can't afford the subscription school. I told Mrs. Prescott," he said carefully, "that the person she needed for what she was trying to build was you. That you had been operating at a fraction of the scale of what she was attempting with a fraction of the resources and had achieved results that most institutions with full funding failed to achieve." He held her gaze. "I told her the truth, Maggie, that's all." She looked at him. "You told her about me," she said. "My work, specifically." "Yes." "Without asking me." He paused. "Yes, is that—" "No," she said. "It's not. I'm not angry." She sat down. "I'm trying to understand what this is." "It's an opportunity," he said simply, "for you to do what you already do with more resources and a wider reach. In Richmond. In Richmond, if you choose it. Or from here consulting by correspondence, if that's what works." He looked at her. "Maggie, this is not me trying to move you somewhere. This is me saying that what you do has value beyond Rosewood, and that a woman in Richmond with a library and a problem recognized that independently." He paused. "I just connected two people who needed to meet." She held the letter. She thought about 14 children in a church back room. She thought about Ada's alphabet, about Penny's reading, about what happened when a door opened and someone said, "This is for you too." She thought about what it would mean to help build something larger, not instead of Rosewood, alongside it. "I'll write to her," she said. "Good," he said. "And William." She looked at him. "Next time you intend to tell someone in Richmond that they should hire me, ask first." He met her eyes. "Yes," he said. "You're right. I'm sorry." She nodded. She stood. She paused at the door. "The library," she said. "What did Prescott say about it specifically?" He allowed himself a small, careful smile. He said it was better organized than anything he'd seen his firm manage in 15 years. He paused. "Mrs. Prescott apparently has the same gift for quiet, systematic competence that I've observed in certain people I know." Maggie looked at him. "You like that?" she said. "The quiet, systematic competence. I like you," he said. "The competence is part of you. I don't separate them." She left. She went home and she sat at her kitchen table and she wrote to Mrs. Prescott with the careful attention of a woman who understood that this letter mattered and that it deserved to be right. She wrote for 2 hours. When she finished, she read it back. It was good. She sealed it and set it aside for the morning post, and she sat in her kitchen with the lamp burning and she thought about what her life looked like from where she was standing. 14 children in a soon-to-be-built school. A letter to a woman in Richmond with a library. A man in the back room of the Rosewood Inn who had told someone she should be hired. A road that the county was finally maintaining. A formal authorization with 4 signatures. 31 years of invisible work, and the world was slowly, imperfectly, unevenly beginning to see it. She thought, this is what it feels like. She had not known. The schoolhouse was finished in late October. 4 weeks as Howell had estimated, with the Aldrich brothers managing the frame, and Barrett's lumber going up faster than anyone had predicted, and Mrs. Graves's husband installing windows that let in more morning light than even the adjusted sketch had promised. The day it was finished, Maggie walked through it alone first. She stood in the larger room, the main teaching room, with its good Eastern light and its benches sized for actual children, and its board on the wall that William had sourced from a supplier in Richmond and had delivered without making it a production, and she stood there in the quiet of a new room that had not yet been used, and she felt the particular sensation of something she had been building without knowing she was building it, arriving at a shape she could finally see. The smaller room was for older students. Penny had already claimed a corner of it as her reading space with the proprietary confidence of a girl who understood that this was partly hers. Maggie stood in the doorway of the smaller room and looked at Penny's corner, and she thought about a 13-year-old who couldn't read her own name, and she breathed. William found her there. He came in through the main door and crossed the larger room and stood in the doorway beside her, and they both looked at Penny's corner in the smaller room, and neither of them said anything for a while. "It's right," he said finally. "Yes?" she said. "When do you open?" "Monday," she said. 14 students. Possibly more. Mrs. Crawford came by yesterday and asked if her daughter could attend. "What did you say?" "I said the school was open to any child in Rosewood, regardless of family means." She paused. "Mrs. Crawford's family has means, but the principle applies in all directions." He almost smiled. "Yes," he said. "It does." She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the school, at the room, at the work of 4 weeks and 31 years, with an expression she knew now, that particular expression that meant something, had genuinely moved him, and he was not going to perform it, but was also not going to hide it. "William," she said. He looked at her. She had been carrying something for 3 weeks, since the proposal on the North Road, since the answer she had given him, and the reason she had given for it. She had been carrying it and examining it and turning it over with the same methodical attention she gave to everything that mattered. She had her answer. "I said I needed time to know that what I chose was because I wanted it," she said, "not because I was grateful." He was very still. "I know what I want," she said. "I've known for a while. I was just—" She stopped. "I was being careful," which was right, "but I'm done being careful about this particular thing." He looked at her. "Maggie," he said, and in his voice was everything: the 2 months of patience, the 9 days in Richmond, the thread and the step, and the primer and the sketch for the school, the back row of every meeting, the steady, undemanding presence of a man who had decided to let her arrive at her own pace and had meant it. "Yes," she said, "just that." He looked at her. "Yes," she said again, clearly, with the full weight of a woman who had examined the word from every angle and found it accurate. He crossed the room. He took her hand, both her hands, the way he had done in the Richmond parlor at the beginning of all of this, simple and steady and without theater. "You're certain," he said. "I'm certain," she said. "I've spent 30 years not being certain of things for myself. I know what certain feels like when I actually have it." She looked at him. "This is it." He was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. She looked at him. "All right," she said. They stood in the schoolhouse that Rosewood had built, that she had organized, and he had funded, and the Aldrich brothers had framed, and Mrs. Graves's husband had windowed, and 31 people had voted for, and they held the quiet of it together. They married in December. Small. The Reverend recovered from his chest cold and visibly moved by the occasion. Thomas Rosen and his wife. Old Carver, who arrived early and sat in the front and told everyone within range that he had known this was coming since the first Tuesday he watched them walk past his house together. Penny Morrison stood with Maggie. She did it with the gravity of a girl who understood that she was witnessing something that mattered and intended to remember every detail. Ada was there holding her primer, wearing her best dress, and when the Reverend pronounced them married, she started clapping with the immediate, uncomplicated joy of a 7-year-old who loves the person getting married and has no complicated feelings about public emotion. The room followed. Old Carver said, "Hear, hear." 3 weeks after the wedding, Maggie traveled to Richmond, not to relocate to meet Mrs. Prescott. 1 week with William staying with the Prescotts in the particular slightly formal hospitality of people who are not entirely sure what they expected and are pleasantly recalibrating. The library was on a secondary street in a building that was smaller than the Rosewood schoolhouse, but better furnished, and Mrs. Prescott herself was a small, precise woman with the focused intelligence of someone who had been underestimated for so long that she had stopped wasting energy on it and redirected entirely into results. She and Maggie recognized each other immediately, not explicitly, not with any dramatic statement. Just the quiet mutual recognition of two women who have been operating with less than they deserve and have gotten very good at making it work anyway. Their meeting lasted 3 hours. Mrs. Prescott's husband looked in at the 2-hour mark and retreated rapidly. William, who had been meeting with Prescott in the next room about estate matters that had not managed themselves in his absence, caught Maggie's eye through the doorway when she emerged at the 3-hour mark and read her face. "Well," he said. "She's starting a second location," Maggie said. "A lending library for working women, different hours, different inventory. She needs someone to advise on the financial management and the community outreach." She paused. "I told her I could consult by correspondence and come to Richmond twice a year." William looked at her. "She agreed," he said. "She said quarterly would be better," Maggie said. "I told her we'd see." He was quiet for a moment. "How does it feel?" he said. "Being asked for something like this?" She thought about it honestly. "Strange," she said. "Good strange. The kind that takes some getting used to." "Like the thread," he said. She looked at him. "Like the thread," she agreed. He held out his arm. She took it. They walked out into Richmond, the city that was not her city, the world that was not her world, and yet she moved through it with the particular steady competence of a woman who carries herself with her and knows it. The following spring, Rosewood held its 31st anniversary celebration. Chairman Howell read the names of citizens who had contributed to the town's community over the preceding year. The list was different this time. 14 names. The last one was Margaret Caldwell Harrington. Maggie sat in the audience and heard her name and felt the thing she had not allowed herself to feel at the 30th anniversary, the small, genuine satisfaction of being acknowledged. Not desperately needed, not the fulcrum of her worth. Just acknowledged. One name on a list. Her name. She did not cry. Though it was, she would have told Ada a reasonable response. William was beside her. He did not squeeze her hand or make anything of the moment. He simply sat beside her the way he sat beside her in all things present steady, not requiring the moment to be more than it was. After the celebration, they walked the North Road. It was well maintained now. The county crew came regularly, which was still faintly miraculous to Maggie every time she saw it. But she still walked it. Old habit, she told William. He walked it with her. At the East Bend, where the runoff used to collect, she stopped. She looked at the road. 31 years of this. 31 years of early mornings and shovels and the particular satisfaction of redirecting water before it damaged something irreplaceable. "You're going to keep walking this road?" William said. Not a question, an observation. "Yes," she said. "Even though the county, someone should still walk it," she said. "Make sure the work is done right. Know where the problem places are before they become actual problems." She looked at him. "That doesn't stop being necessary. just because someone else is finally doing the maintenance. He looked at her. "No," he said. "It doesn't." She looked at the road. She thought about 31 years of a town that had not known how to see her, and a year that had learned imperfectly and gradually, and not without setbacks to try. She thought about Ada and Penny and Tommy, and 14 children in a 2-room schoolhouse with Eastern light. She thought about Mrs. Prescott and the lending library and twice a year in Richmond and the letter she had written last week about the organizational structure of the second location. She thought about the ring on her hand, plain gold. Her choice, no diamonds, exactly right. She thought about William on her left walking the road she had walked alone for 31 years. She thought, this is a life. Not the life she had managed in the absence of anything else. Not the life built around being needed by people who never quite looked at her. A life she had chosen, deliberately, with full knowledge, with her eyes open. A life of her own choosing. "Ready," William said. She looked at the road ahead. "Yes," she said. They walked on. And Margaret Caldwell Harrington, the woman who had been invisible for 31 years, who had fixed shutters alone in the summer heat and filled ruts in a road no one noticed, and given $60 she could not afford to families who never knew her name, walked forward into the life she had always deserved and had finally fully chosen for herself. Not because someone saw her, because she had learned at last to see herself, and that had made all the difference.